I'll probably never forget the day that I was knee-deep into a conversation about unforgiveness with my counselor. She knew that the unforgiveness was causing my heart to harbor anger. I knew that holding on to anger wouldn't draw me any closer to finding joy. And yet, we found ourselves at this crossroad with no clear direction on where to go. So she made a suggestion. Shannon, why don't you try acting out a conversation with this person? Place a pillow in a chair and tell them, what you really want to say deep inside. I can't do that, was my response. Why? She asked. Because God wouldn't like me to say all those things. He would be disappointed. She paused for a moment and looked right at me. Shannon, God already knows what is in your heart. Whoa. For a brief minute, a wave of total shame poured over me. I thought that by not speaking it, I had somehow hidden this stuff away from him so that he would be proud of how I was holding it all together to serve him. But really, he could see it all along, and I felt ashamed. Funny how that's always my knee-jerk reaction, shame. It took me a while to move beyond it and truly process what she had said. He could see it all along, and yet he still chose to pour his love over me. He still sought my heart and held me close. He met me there, right where I was, and he loved me just the same. So really, by trying to hide this unforgiveness, I wasn't preventing him from knowing it was there. I was only preventing him from moving through it with his healing touch. Suddenly, I'm looped back to the bleeding woman. If you're new to the story, don't worry, so was I. But when God took me on a journey earlier this year, he spoke to me about the bleeding woman often. You'll find a more detailed version of her story in the book of Mark. But for this post, I've used the abbreviated version from the book of Matthew, chapter 9, verse 20 through 22. Just then a woman who had suffered for 12 years with constant bleeding came up behind him. She touched the fringe of his robe, for she thought, if I can just touch his robe, I will be healed. Jesus turned around, and when he saw her, he said, Daughter, be encouraged. Your faith has made you well. And the woman was healed at that moment. Because these two verses don't necessarily give you the full picture, I'd like to describe this woman in more detail. It is said that a bleeding disorder like hers would have meant total ostracization from her family and her community. You see, due to her disorder, she was said to be unclean, and worse, she could make others unclean with her touch or her presence. So for 12 years, this hurting woman had not felt the warmth of a hug. As I processed that, I simply cannot imagine how broken my heart would feel. She had suffered a great deal physically, and yet she could not be comforted in the arms of another as she cried. She must have been so desperate for his healing touch when she heard that Jesus was walking by. And then I picture what she must have looked like. Ostracization surely meant that all other hygiene practices were likely extremely limited. I'm sure her clothes were tattered and torn. I imagine that her body was covered in dirt, or worse. Years of bleeding and no proper access to the cleansing practices of her times likely caused an odor that she was completely helpless to remedy. I wonder if her hair was matted. I wonder if her face showed signs of a woman who had been weathered and broken. It truly squeezes my heart to imagine her this way, but this was likely her reality, however unimaginable it may feel. Then I wonder, what if she had looked down at herself and thought, I cannot come to Jesus like this. What if she had left to try to quickly wash herself first? Would she have missed him walking by? Would she have been so busy trying to make herself good enough for him that she missed her healing entirely? And more importantly, did he expect that of her? I'm going to sit with that last question for just a moment because I find myself relating to it more and more. I think we know the answer. Jesus turned around, and when he saw her, he said, Daughter, be encouraged. Your faith has made you well. And the woman was healed at that moment. And it is in that one verse that I realize he didn't feel repulsed. He didn't turn away. He didn't condemn her for approaching him, so unclean. And he certainly didn't tell her to come back when she's a better version of herself. And he won't for me, and he won't for you. He isn't asking us to bring the best version of ourselves to his table. He isn't asking us to get all of our ducks in a row before we touch the fringe of his garment. He doesn't need us to clear all the other clutter and come to him with our hearts pure and ready. We are trying so hard to clean up all this mess, all this dirt, and all this debris, to prepare ourselves for him, to make ourselves good enough. But my friends, he is walking by right now. Look up and run to him. For just a moment, forget about the odor that your unclean makes, and just let him hold you and heal you. He isn't asking us for anything else. The first thing that God spoke to me about the bleeding woman was that above all else, she prioritized these 2 words: draw close. Not cleansing, not making herself worthy, not being good enough, and not trying to be perfect. Draw close. He has been pouring over us the last 2 weeks with his unconditional love, covering us in his grace and reminding us that we are his cherished possession. But there are still things in our heart that we haven't given to him because we feel ashamed. There are pieces of us that we haven't let him touch because we feel the need to clean them up first. There is still a part of us that holds back because we just don't have it all together or all ready yet. And we think surely he would look at us with total discontent and tell us to come back when we are more prepared. Trust me, friends, I understand. It took me a long time to let him into my unforgiveness and begin the healing process. I thought I had to keep it under wraps so that I would make him proud. In reality, the only thing I was doing was blocking his healing power from moving through it. And guess what? He's still working in it today. But I know now that he will love me no less for it and no more for the healing of it. I will always be loved just as much by my Heavenly Father that proudly calls me his. Fall into him. Bring the authentic you. Let him love you just as you are, the beauty and the things that you work so hard to hide. Because when you let him have it all, you begin to truly realize and understand that he loves you the same today, tomorrow, and always. And that truth, rooted deeply into your heart, will produce the faith that allows you to begin to step out of the boat and draw closer to him. Blessings today, my friends.